Water Commission meeting, August,
23rd.
I'm not quite there yet. August 23rd. This meeting's being recorded for rebroadcast over
Give it a
Lumber
second
Public
and hit it
Access. We're gonna go over the agenda. We got warrants to sign real quick.
Did you want to call the meeting to order?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No problem.
Thank you.
Can we circulate maybe an attendance into the meeting? Is that possible?
Yep.
Just got those in the email.
Do you want,
And just a sheet,
Everybody?
if we have everybody that was here for the meeting or going over
No.
anything, that would be great.
public too?
I would say, yeah, anybody that's a member of the public that's here.
Yeah, pass it around and sign in. Please.
That can sign in.
Print, okay.
And there's two there, John.
Oh, my autograph.
Can we circulate some of these, or?
You can give those guys.
Yeah.
Thank. I don't know if you guys want more. It was just about knowledge.
Okay. Oh,
What flow rate?
That was at 125. So I think the last result was inaccurate.
Very weird.
Remember I was saying the iron and manganese were
Everything was off.
low, everything was off. So I don't know what happened at the lab. It mixed us with someone else or
Oh, I
what.
don't want it.
Because everything stayed consistent before and after, but that one sample in the middle messed everything. So I think we should toss that one in.
It does not seem accurate,
Yeah.
Is this an average bill from National Grid?
No.
Nope, so I put
That's-
next to that 3 months, cause
Oh,
they,
okay, I didn't.
it was, something was messed up on our meter and they had to estimate for a couple months. So I was waiting until we got an accurate read to be able to pay the bills correctly, so that's almost,
Is that the meter at this place? or-
no, Keating's.
Okay.
So that's, which is an average,
Yeah,
like
that makes-
5,000 a month.
Minutes of the tenth.
You guys mind just so we can keep track.
So during that time, we did not pay them for
No.
those past remotes?
Nope.
Copy.
They were so far behind in sending them, and all of a sudden they sent like 2 of them
Yeah.
with these very weird numbers, so I called. And they said, oh, there was something up, we had to estimate. So I waited and we just got the bill in with the accurate read. So now that's Larkin's old one for, that's what,
$1.90.
yeah. Yes,
Kinda rough, wasn't it?
exactly.
We're all at, but-
Yes.
CA Turner's curb boxes. That's life insurance. Yep.
Everybody has their favorite pens, you know, which,
Surprised you can keep it so long.
yeah.
Oh,
Thank you.
Prince, use them too. then.
Oh, to
Stuff,
make the books.
Yeah.
Minuteman Press,
No, no,
yeah.
I was trying to, yeah.
Hickory Hills Association is supposed to have us some paperwork from their lawyer by the 24th, which is tomorrow.
There
Well,
was a
they-
misunderstanding, I think, on that, Christie
Yes.
was saying.
So I had emailed last week saying, you know, please still get us the list of questions so that we can present them to everybody before the meeting. So she sent me that. I asked again about any letters from her lawyer, so just yesterday or today, she sent an email from their previous attorney dated, what was it,
88.
Yeah, it was
Okay,
dated from
so
like forever ago, and she said, I think there's a misunderstanding. We told you guys we had a letter from our previous attorney,
Yeah.
not our new attorney, and I said, okay, I thought the commissioners were under the assumption that your new counsel had some kind of opinion on
Right.
ownership, and unfortunately that was between yesterday and today, so hopefully.
And that letter was sent to you.
Oh, I didn't receive it.
long ago, we sent the
Yep.
original information as well, so that same letter from Attorney Van Buren.
Oh,
was
yes.
In part of the original packet, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
So our
yes.
attorney has reviewed that and sees no reason that it's not valid.
Oh, okay, I think, yeah, I think it was just a
But it's
misunderstanding.
speaking with your attorney if, you know, they feel there's something different.
Okay.
Okay.
Waiting for us.
Nope. Yeah.
Or you can,
That. The agenda's still there, it's just.
didn't I just give it to you? I gave you a copy.
I think it's in the folder.
Oh.
Unless I put it in something else.
Fixes the
Yes. So we just need a motion.
Look for a motion to approve the meeting minutes of August 10th and August 17th.
You just made that motion and John can second it.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we're gonna move right on. We have a presentation from Ty and Bond regarding the pilot study for the Hickory Hills well, and as it pertains to PFAS and everything else related there too. So, we'll give it to you, gentlemen.
Okay, thank you. So just some brief introductions. So I'm Tom Mahana. I'm the project director from Ty and Bond. Seated to my left is Lou Sirocco. He's the senior project manager from Ty and Bond, and Derek Belanger, who's our lead technical engineer on the pilot study. So what we have tonight is a couple of things. Just it's kind of a combination of our previous meetings with this board and with Fran and Christie, and kind of trying to get a general understanding of what you would like to see for options to consider for the pilot study. So we'll put together a brief presentation with a fair number of slides just to kind of describe our approach. We're presenting here about 4 different options to consider, and we'll get into the details of each. So what we thought might be the easiest way to do this is just logistically, we just printed out the PowerPoint presentation rather than trying to project it out onto a screen. So there's hard copies everybody should have. We also have a brief memo that just gives a little bit more description on each of the different options that we're going to discuss here tonight. So what I thought I would do is just turn it over to Lou and Derek, and they'll kind of walk you through the presentation and the different options, and we can, feel free to interrupt at any point you have any questions, or we can wait till the end when we get through everything. And so what we did also is, in our memo, we kind of put together some estimated budgets. These aren't like final costs, but we wanted to kind of give you a general sense of orders of magnitude, what each option, the approximate cost for each option, because it can vary significantly as we look at the different levels of effort and the durations of the pilot study. So we can talk a little bit more about that as we go through the presentation. All right, so Lou and Derek, if you guys want to.
Sure. Again, my name is Lou Sirocco with Ty and Bond. I'll get things rolling here, and then maybe when it makes sense, I'll turn it over to you, Derek. You can fill in some details on some things. So moving on to slide 2, what we were planning on talking about, I just kind of wanted to briefly go through water sources and why this well is important, and then we'll touch into what water quality parameters that we're talking about that we're really would be gearing the pilot towards, that we're concerned about removing, and why that's important, and then a couple of different piloting options, as well as at the end we can talk about, I know there's some concern about impacts to lake, so we can talk about that as well. So on slide 3, just in a nutshell, we've got the Lancaster Ave wells, the Hickory Hill well, as well as the Keating well. District uses about, on an annual average, 500,000 gallons a day. This can fluctuate from, say 350 to 1.2 million gallons in a single day.
I'm sure this year would be higher than that.
In a drought year, that will give you some more insight on water usage for sure. So next slide, Water Management Act permit. It looks like you've got about 0.54 million gallons per day on your permit, so you're On average, you're right up against the permit, which is common for a lot of water suppliers. But really what the importance that folks try to stress is being able to meet your maximum data demands with your largest source offline. You don't always get to pick when that source goes offline. Ideally, it goes offline when you're not having a peak demand scenario, so you can take it down for maintenance, but things don't always cooperate. So the rule of thumb here is to generally have or be able to meet your maximum daily demand with your largest source offline. So when we flip the page to slide 5, this kind of tallies up the maximum daily rate that you can get out of each of your existing wells. You can see the Keating well is by far the largest well that you have at the 1.4. Hickory Hills is the 0.72, basically 500 gallons a minute. Then the wells over at Lancaster Ave have each smaller capacities. So when you go to slide 6, we can say, okay, right now we got Hickory Hills offline and just those remaining. I guess we can flip on beyond that. But when you see when the Keating well goes offline, there's only about 0.98 million gallons a day available of that 1.2 maximum day demand. So
And that can't be sustained, because those wells cannot run on a continuous basis at full capacity. So the water tables can't support that
right,
flow rate.
right. So even under a short duration, certainly not under an extended duration.
We
yeah.
talked about it, I think, one of
Last
the meetings,
meeting.
I wanna say we probably can make it 2 days
2 days.
on that capacity.
Right, so
well,
if Keating well goes down in the middle of a high demands,
Yeah, well number 5 can continue to run, and well number 2. The other 2 are probably 8 hours, and then they're shutting off the low water limit.
right. So we would be talking substantial water usage restrictions and cutbacks. Only essential water usage at that point in a state of emergency. So that's the importance of having the other, from a capacity standpoint, the Hickory Hill well gives you a much needed backup in the event that there is an issue with the largest well. So what are we concerned about? Why is Hickory Hill's well been offline for the recent duration? There's a couple of things. It's got iron, it's got manganese, and recently it's been sampled, and you can see for PFAS. So on slide 8, iron and manganese, typically it's been kind of viewed as a nuisance aesthetic issue. You get the orange water from the iron, you get the blackish water from the manganese. However, the state of Massachusetts now has pretty strict guidelines for manganese. They really don't want you putting more than about 0.3 milligrams per liter out into your system. Anything above that is considered undesirable. They absolutely will shut the well down for 1 milligram per liter. You can't put that out at all. But the 0.3 is kind of a lifetime exposure limit that they're looking at. So it's once your manganese concentrations start creeping up to that point, they start engaging the water supplier about, well, what's your long-term goal? How are you going to deal with this? And so in the short term, it's turn the well off if you can manage to turn it off while you figure out what you're going to do. Slide 9. So this is taken from the website, Mass website. So those are the exposure limits. The lifetime is the 0.3. Yeah, in the 10-day, really can't really keep putting out a 1 milligram per liter. And really, when you get up to that 0.3, DEP, what they want you to do is put out a notification to the public saying, you really shouldn't be using this to create, to mix with baby formula. It's kind of more of an issue for the smaller humans that those limits. So that's why they kind of want you to educate folks that for the infants it's really not recommended. So it's been easy to avoid having to do that. You guys don't put out manganese into your system. You're taking it offline. slide 10, what are some ways that it can be treated? For the longest time, if your limits or levels are low, you can add a chemical and it sequesters the manganese in solution. So it doesn't create a nuisance. It helps avoid, those staining and oxidizing out and causing problems throughout the distribution system. But once you get up beyond that 0.3, sequestering it doesn't remove it. It's still there. So then you're looking at how do you remove it. And there's a couple of options. There's softening, ion exchange. That's more on the small scale side, not really in the hundreds of gallons side. There's the chemical oxidation, which has been used for decades. You've probably heard of green sand filter media. That's the tried and true, been used dozens and dozens of places all over New England. Very common. And then now there's biological filtration, which there's actually probably a half dozen facilities in Mass now that are using, in New England, they're using biological filtration. It's a technology that's been used for a long time over in Europe, and it's becoming very popular here now because it actually uses less chemicals, it'll have longer run times, and create a lot less backwash residuals that you have to deal with. So it's growing in popularity, especially at sites where dealing with residuals can be limited.
Yeah, just want to point out quickly, the first slide, our kind of our title slide, that's a picture of the interior of a biological treatment plant that we did for down in the town of Middleborough. It's been online now for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years. So it was one of the first biological plants in New England, in Massachusetts actually. I think it was the third. Well, at the time we did it, it was probably the largest capacity-wise.
How big?
That treats 1.4 million gallons a day.
Yep.
Cost-wise, is that significantly higher than the other options?
I think it's cheaper.
The economics in terms of your capital investment, it depends on your water quality.
Okay.
Okay. The standard.
Fair
So it's roughly equivalent,
Okay.
depending.
It was a very affordable project when we did it.
Yes, it was.
Those costs are considerably higher now.
And we've looked at it for several other communities, and we've got a couple of them in construction now throughout the state, so we've decided to go that way based on the economic evaluation.
How big a building is that? That looks like good size.
Probably less than 5,000 square feet.
I'd say, yeah, less than 5,000
Yeah, it
square
was
feet.
not a very big building.
No.
It was treating 1.5 times the capacity that we have out of that well now.
Right,
Yeah,
well, that's double.
Is the size of the system proportional to the amount of water you're treating?
there's a proportionality there about how often you want to maintain it, how much how your water quality is and how much water you're putting through it. The only caveat to that too is that's just the iron and manganese portion of the treatment system. There's also a PFAS that would be a separate treatment system.
Yeah, because we're working in tight quarters down
Yep.
there, so that's something that needs to be considered.
So it was several years ago, we tried to do a pilot study at the Hickory Hills Well and the well number 2 on Lancaster Ave. And the biological is the method that we were gonna do for pilot study.
Okay.
And that got voted down, so we tried then to do it. And that was the main reason why is because the footprint was smaller for the building, backwash was less. And, yeah, and it was, back then I was told it was cheaper than the green sand, so.
Well, you can almost double your flow rates through the filter. So your loading rate through a biological filter is just much higher than what you would put through a traditional green sand filter. And that's where the economics come in. Well, part of the economics.
A big portion too is that backwash water, the reduction in how much you have to backwash it. If you don't have an easy access to sewer, you have to haul that off-site, and that's a very high cost for a traditional iron manganese system.
So, like that Middleborough site, the picture on the front, there's no on-site disposal at that site. So we backwash everything into tanks, and then they have a truck periodically come by and they haul off-site.
That was my initial plan, was we
Yeah.
backwash to a tanker truck and get it out of there, so.
And to further lengthen the time between hauling away, there's a recycle system. So you'll backwash, let it settle, recycle the top portion.
Gotcha.
What you end up doing is you concentrate it on the bottom of that tank. Every so often you haul it away.
Makes sense.
Does any of that ever turn into somewhat solid if you let it settle a lot? So you could haul away with a dump truck instead of a vacuum or water tanker?
It would need to go into some sort of like drying bed to get it to be a
Oh, I
real
gotcha.
solid,
Yeah.
right?
Can you give us an idea what the difference in cost is in today's dollars versus what was paid to set this up originally?
So that plant, 1.4 million gallons a day with the recycle system. The final construction, and that was with a couple of replacement wells that we added
Yeah, right.
along the way to maximize the output of that well site. The total construction costs were around 5.7 million.
What would it be today?
And that was completed in 2018. So,
Any PFAS treatment there or no?
This was before PFAS.
This was before
PFAS. You know,
Before we-
So
That's
that's
how
how
new
we
it
are now
is,
to go
yeah.
back.
Yeah, and it's tough to relate that to the size, because we're talking about a smaller filtration system. We're talking about treating less water. So it's,
right.
And yeah, there
it's
was,
good to know, but tough to really equate it to what we're dealing with until we
Yeah.
study what we're dealing with.
and a large portion of the cost too can come from the type of building, the
Right.
aesthetics of it, the site, and how you wanna, screen it. Those are,
Right, and you mentioned 2 additional wells to put in,
Right.
so it's tough to equate that project. I wouldn't
It's
think it's a-
basically double
Yeah,
to what we're talking.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, well, then I think we're at 11 now.
Yes, so Derek, you wanna talk about PFAS?
yeah, sure. So PFAS is an emerging contaminant. It's a consumer product that's in a lot of things, from styrofoam cups to microwave popcorn bags, just about everything. Most folks have some sort of residual PFAS concentration in their blood already. It's fairly common, unfortunately, contaminant at very, very small levels. So we talk about iron and manganese in milligrams per liter. We talk about PFAS in nanograms per liter, so multiple orders of magnitude smaller concentration. But it's an emerging contaminant that EPA and many health advocacy groups have their eyes on. In 2021, I think October of last year, EPA put out a strategic roadmap to address PFAS in the nation's waters. One of the first steps in that roadmap was to release a health advisory limit, which they released in June, which established basically a long-term interim health advisory, which basically just tried to inform people that PFAS is very bad for you to consume. Those health advisory limits were extremely low, lower than anything we would measure in water, but essentially it was the first step towards national regulation for PFAS. Massachusetts has been a leader in dealing with PFAS, and they've established an MCL of 20 parts per trillion, or nanograms per liter. That's a combination of 6 different PFAS molecules. The expectation is that that is going to be superseded in the future when EPA officially comes out with an MCL, which is maximum contaminant level. As I mentioned, the PFAS that Massachusetts currently regulates is 20 parts per trillion. From our understanding of the sampling, it's somewhere in the Hickory Hills wells between, say, 30 and 40 parts per trillion. So definitely another reason why Mass DEP would want it offline if not treated. So in addition to the manganese health concerns, the PFAS concerns in the Hickory Hills well would need to be treated.
Okay.
So on slide 12 here, really the next step in moving forward with treatment of a well would be to do a pilot study and demonstrate to Mass DEP that the proposed treatment technology will effectively remove manganese and PFAS before bringing the well back online. And this would use, there's a couple different options we can go through, but there's essentially just a step where we need to prove and select a technology and then use those results to design a full-scale treatment system if that's the way you'd like to go forward.
And one thing that we should point out too, when we're traditionally, iron and manganese has been pilot tested all on its own, and, you know, that's a requirement from DEP. Absence of that, if you had PFAS, that can be pilot tested on its own. When they're both present, it's typically what you would need to do is you need to remove the iron and manganese before, you know, putting it through the PFAS treatment process. So iron and manganese treatment becomes the pre-treatment step before PFAS. So it's just pointing that out because it becomes important, and that's what adds the layer of complexity to your piloting options. So because if we only wanted to say pilot test PFAS, it's really not possible because you have to remove the iron and manganese first to be able to test it.
Does the iron and manganese affect the level of PFAS in the water?
No, from what we have seen so far, there does not seem to be a direct linkage between iron and manganese and the PFAS concentrations. PFAS is a man-made contaminant, so it's entered into the environment from a number of different pathways that are all, you know, man-made. Iron and manganese is a naturally occurring thing that's all over the place, and pretty much anywhere in New England, if you dig down, you're going to find iron and manganese of some concentration.
I got a quick question on PFAS. Do you see in any of the testing that you're doing or any of the wells that you're working with, do you see the PFAS level increasing at all over time? Or is this something that's fairly level? My concern is that we have one well with PFAS. Is there potential for an increased level in our other wells as well? Could it increase?
We see it like in well fields, you know, we can see how operation of one can impact the other. Where Hickory Hills is only a single well, it's really, without doing a really in detail like groundwater investigation to figure out, you know, where, you know, what the extent of the plume, so to speak, and the levels in that are present in the groundwater, it's hard to predict.
No, the other wells we have, so the Lancaster Ave well, the Keating well, they all have traces of PFAS. Is the potential there for the level of PFAS to increase at those sites? Have you seen it increase?
Nothing to do with Hickory Hills.
Nothing to do with Hickory Hills. My concern is down the road, that if we don't go after our biggest contributor right now, that down the road, if our other sites tend to increase their level of PFAS, now the whole supply is contaminated, and we have nothing.
Right.
So that's my concern, is if you've seen well sites that have started off at a certain level and have actually increased beyond the allowable level of PFAS allowed.
We're seeing that a lot because the more that we've been testing, you know, and it is, you know, again, it kind of has impacted the way some of the water suppliers have had to operate, because situations like you're in, they've had to turn off certain supplies that have high levels, which then changes the demand on the others, forces them to pump more. We're in a drought. I mean, this is all, you know, within, you know, we're still talking, you know, less than a year here, or just over a year, that this whole issue has really, you know, come to a head. And you know, it doesn't help the fact that you're in a drought, and you know, you're pumping water. Your water table is now drawing from much larger areas. You have wells off, that creates more demand in other wells. So I guess my long-winded answer is at least what I've seen in the communities that we're working in. Almost all of them have seen increased levels. Very, very few have seen levels going down. But again, as you know, as we get out of this drought and as we get into fall and water levels start to restore itself, we would expect that we would see these you know, concentrations start to dissipate a little.
The only thing I'll add to that is that in lieu of the concentrations in the well going up, the analytical methods, the way we sample for PFAS, the number of chemicals that we're looking for, and the regulations themselves are all getting more and more refined. So a year, 2 years from now, the current test that tests for say 18 chemicals is likely to test for 40 chemicals. The ability to test below 2 or 4 parts per trillion, we're going to be able to hopefully be more accurate at those lower concentrations. And then similarly, the EPA is gonna most likely set a much lower concentration than what we're, limits on these PFAS chemicals than what we see with the current 20 PPT Massachusetts MCL. So it's, a lot of it's still evolving, but I think things will tend to get more strict and more,
More regulated.
Yeah, more regulated,
Yeah.
before they would just, lighten up.
So remember, we don't really have the history to answer your question, I mean, because we've been pretty consistent. So our ranges are in the 4 to 9 area of parts per trillion, so.
We're running, I believe, air. The reason they shut down wells was the PFAS issue, I think.
They built
So-
two plants.
So they're, they're putting a substantial amount of money, but they had to seriously restrict their water usage. Until they ramped their system up at a substantial cost, I'm assuming, to be able to meet the supply.
So
Or the demand.
do you have any, what the impacts will be with the new regulations, how that'll affect many of the towns?
Well, from what I've seen in the drafts, EPA seems to be targeting like PFAS and PFOA specifically. So if you have higher, so say you have 10 parts per trillion of PFAS, and that's it. Under mass regulations, you're not above the MCL, but you could be above the MCL under the EPA now, once that comes out.
Because I've heard talk of where it's 4 parts per trillion now, and the new regulation is 0.002 parts per trillion.
So that's a health advisory, and that is a strictly health-based determination. So essentially what EPA is saying is do not consume PFOA or PFOS. The problem that's had with water suppliers is that's not something that is translatable to a measurement in your water. It's not a reasonable, we can't measure to those numbers. We can only really measure down to like 2 parts per trillion, not 0.02. So I think that we'll likely see a MCL that is somewhere in the less than 10. I think Connecticut has just put out an action level based on their own science, which is kind of a preemptive to the EPA's MCL. And I believe PFOS was a 16, and PFOA was a 16, and PFOS was a 10. So I think that may be where EPA comes down, or they may come down and say, our health advisory said, parts per quadrillion are bad for you. We think it's worth investing in PFAS removal infrastructure across the nation to remove it down to 4 parts per trillion. At this point, we're kind of speculating what the EPA is going to do, but the health advisories were pretty clear that EPA thinks this is a chemical that needs to be removed.
So in the future, we could wind up thinking about a treatment plant for Lancaster Avenue.
Well, so that's kind of getting my concern, that if we don't, right now, the funding is on something that's more than 20 parts per trillion. The funding isn't for the stuff that is less than that. And if they lower the allowable limits, or we get more PFAS into those wells, which brings them above the allowable limits, then we're in a crisis situation. So,
Yeah, seriously.
to try to treat what we have now that has funding available and is above the allowable limits, might help us down the road. So that's kind of, that was kind of where I was headed with.
What
with
about
that.
thinking about something right now for Lancaster? I mean, I know the money is astronomical, but it's gonna get double astronomical
Well-
in another 5 years.
I understand where you're coming from on that, John, but this is, we're kind of looking at where we can get funding and assistance
Yeah.
first. And that would give us a direction to travel if we had to do something down the road somewhere else.
Right now, the rest of the cities and towns in Massachusetts, or if they're playing by this 20 parts per million, trillion, whatever it is, rule, that they're fine. Right now, we have one well that's not. And to go after, if we presented a pilot study for our funding, they'd be like, yes, you're about it, and I think we'd have a good shot at getting money. If for some reason in the future that this drops, as it more than likely will, you're gonna see about 80% of the communities being like, we need some money to fix this. And there's not gonna be any, so that's why we're trying to attack
There's
this.
160, I believe, communities that are sitting with wells between like 10 and 20 right now in
Right.
Massachusetts.
So-
and even many more that are above the detection limit between 10, so.
The sooner we can get on this,
Yep.
the better.
Yeah.
I think we were on PFAS, is there any other questions on PFAS, and then we'll kind of move forward and get through this a little more.
So I had a question, one more question, I'm sorry. And it's along the same lines, I think, that Mark was asking earlier. So in a single well, in this particular well, as you draw more from it, is the PFAS likely to increase in it?
It's dependent on where the PFAS is coming from, which is a pretty complicated thing to determine.
But we know within 500 or 600 yards, or maybe 1,000 yards, there was once a dump, a Lunenburg dump was within that range, and within probably 200 yards, we know of a dump site where James River dumped chemicals that were supposedly removed, but, you know, so that's also reasonably close, very close, actually, I would guess. And it was, like you said, it was like benzene.
Benzene, silane, and xylene.
Were literally dumped, you know, buried there, so then with that kind of a concentration nearby, it could increase as it's being used.
That would be a good argument for doing this.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
wanna-
GAC would actually, would be a good treatment for,
Well,
those.
and the next question gets to how much overhead do you design into a system so that if the number goes from 37 to 100, can the system accommodate it?
Well, I mean, that's kind of the whole point of just doing this study, is to run this well at a reasonable rate. We're looking to do a longer term study to see what happens when we start running this. You're right, I don't know how this magically works, but does it start, if there is a problem, we'll just start sucking it in? I mean, there's millions of questions.
Yeah, that's what the study is
So
supposedly
that-
telling us.
Yeah, right now we're dealing with 2 data points, and we don't know. And the sensitivity on testing for PFAS is, it's stretching the limit of technology, right? I mean, we can measure things down to 2 parts per trillion. We're talking, in the range of 30 to 40. So we can certainly see it, but establishing a long-term trend takes long-term monitoring to kind of see where it goes.
What would be the solution if it increased? You'd leave the same components there, just change the filters or the filtering agent or whatever's inside to control more of the.
It would change the media more frequently.
Right.
I think that's the point of doing the long-term study. As the
Right.
study is going on, they will continuously monitor this and check to see how the levels are. Are they going up? Are they going down? And you're right, seeing that it's a man-made material, there's really no way to in this case, to guess what it's in and what it's not.
Yeah.
Right.
Doesn't necessarily enter the environment in a uniform manner.
Correct.
Am I
So-
correct?
Sometimes there'll be a fire over, sometimes there's a fire in
Right.
a community and they use the firefighting foam, and that happens to be upstream of a well or a supply. Or, there's a number of different
Sure.
things that could have happened and places they could have come from. So yeah,
Am I correct that this stuff just keeps moving, it doesn't stop like oil or gasoline, it just keep going forward forever?
it's my understanding it is highly mobile in groundwater.
Yeah.
So it doesn't like to park itself and stay in one spot. It follows groundwater flow so to your point, if there's a particular type of plume, and you pump the well, it could increase it because it diverts part of the plume towards that sample.
Towards the well, right.
Or would assist in eventually cleaning that up?
It's effectively cleaning up the environment, yeah. Because if it doesn't go somewhere and get cleaned up, it's gonna go somewhere else and continue the contamination.
Right. So it's actually a benefit to the environment to have a filtration system, if there's contaminants in the soil around. Okay, why don't we, if there's nothing more on the PFAS, we'll continue, I think we're on slide number 12.
Right, so what is a treatment pilot study? So, DEP requires it. They have guidelines. They want to see you go through and test what technology you're going to use, so that there's a high level of confidence you're spending public dollars in a responsible way. That's kind of it in a nutshell. Does it work? And how, do you get it? Are you getting the information you need to design a system that takes into account as many foreseeable things that we can test. So we try to use the water that we're actually going to treat for the pilot tests, rather than just some lab produced
Sure.
amount. And then there's different ways we can do it. There's different types of filter columns and various testing scenarios that we can do. But like I said, the benefits are it helps prove its effectiveness, so you have a high level of confidence that what you're going to build and invest in is going to work. And it gives you an idea and how to plan to operate and maintain that. So moving on to slide 13, specifically for PFAS testing, there's a couple of different options. They allow you to go ahead and use a rapid small-scale column test, is what they call it. And basically what it is it takes the media, it grinds it up into a little bit smaller grains of media, puts it in a really small column, and then you can run a little bit of water and simulate a very long duration of treatment to help get an idea of how quickly your media will be exhausted in a short amount of time. So it's helpful to compare against different types of media, but it's not actual full-scale conditions. So there's some inherent error in the information, so we have to take that with a grain of salt and be conservative when we use it to plan for the future.
When you say media, that's the substance that you're testing for, correct?
The media is the actual filter material, like say GAC, granular active carbon, that's inside the filter that removes the contaminant.
Okay.
So
Like a full
GAC
filter.
looks like a bunch of small black rocks, carbon, like a Brita filter almost, if you see inside. But it's sand in some cases. That's a type of media. But there's different types of media, and different types of media are used for removing different types of contaminants.
Okay.
So we're trying to find the best media that removes your particular contaminant in the most efficient way possible.
Got it.
So, just in the past, have you guys done these studies? Couple questions. There's obviously different types of PFAS, PFOA, or different types of chemicals that whatever this is. As you do these studies, like we talked about before, are there like higher plumes of concentration that come through the ground to these things, and are there different? I know there's different types, and how do you maybe figure that? I don't know, or is it just like blend all together all the time?
Yeah, in some sites, like there's right now there's 6 regulated compounds
Yep.
in Massachusetts. Some of them are carbon with 8-chain carbon with fluorine on it. There's
I don't need the chemistry lesson. I know there's like a lot of stuff at the end.
it's large molecules get taken up easy by some
Sure.
medias, small. So it's really what your specific blend, wherever your contamination came from, whether it's a point source from a firefighting foam or atmospheric deposition, just it coming out of the air and getting into the soil.
Do you guys find though that you're talking about these chemicals that you generally, when you do this study, like, hey, it's a concentration of this chain, and the other ones tend not to be present, or
Yeah, we have sample results from your well, and it's, I believe, predominantly PFOS.
Okay.
So polypersulfate.
Because ours
But every site
breaks it
has
down right
different-
now.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's all over the
In the
place.
ground, of course, that's what you do the study for, you can figure out, but I'm assuming that on this long-term study, you can kind of tune this radio in to be like, this is the frequency we're seeing, and this is what we're treating for.
Right. I think in general, you'll see you're heavily weighted towards a particular number of these particular compounds.
We're in a good spot here in the sense that longer chains are typically easier to treat. So the PFOS is something that's easier to treat than some of the smaller, Gen X chemicals, smaller chain PFAS chemicals.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's where if you start having these more complicated later smaller chain ones, that's where you have to really kind of dial in what your media is. Most PFOA, PFOS facilities end up with carbons.
Correct.
Now, you said something called PFAS and PFOS.
Yeah, so
What's the difference?
PFAS is polyene perfluorinated alkyl substances. And it's a group of chemicals that are between, it could be 500, it's all just a man-made chemicals.
Now I've seen like there's like
Thousands, it's,
5,000
it's-
different chemicals
it's-
roll up under that category.
so we call it.
PFAS and PFOA are just two examples.
Those are the two main early ones that were made back in the 50s and 60s that were very prevalent in many different waterproofing applications and firefighting foams. So I can't remember the names off the top of my head for some reason.
I thought you were gonna give him the chemistry lesson.
No, I'm trying to avoid those. I'm trying to back those out. But the PFOA, PFOA, and PFOS are two constituents under the group of PFAS.
So it all comes into one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what happened
So
when
you know
those
what
two
we
got?
already test for all that stuff. Remember how you were
Yeah,
asking like about each one?
Correct.
Every time we test for PFOS, it actually
He gives you
does
that.
all of the breakdown,
Yeah.
like the ones that we have now. So
Yeah.
they've seen not just the PFOS, but every number for
Right.
each of those.
And currently, the best available test is 18 chemicals. We expect within the next year or so, that list to be, say, 40 chemicals.
Just curious. As this all goes forward, and obviously this level, this PFAS profile level is gonna be going down across the country. To me, there's gonna be more manufacturers that are jumping on the treatment end of things, the chemical end of things, to be like making new ways to pull this out, the media you're talking about. I mean, do we see this cost of media going down or up, or is that, you know what I'm saying? I mean,
I see more demand costs. I know what you're talking about, more competition, because, yeah, it's a huge, I mean, the approved manufacturers, the handful that we deal with in this, are, they're, at their limits as far as being able to keep up with the demand. I mean, we're talking, I think we mentioned to you in one of these previous meetings, like, this equipment, after it gets approved, like when you get ready to build the facility and we go through the whole submittal process where we review the drawings and everything, once that gets approved, it's taken up to a year now for them to fabricate. Just, to keep up with try to keep up with the demand, because it's just exploding. But yeah, you would expect that there'll be more competition, more manufacturers, but highly unlikely you'll see costs go down.
Who manufactures this stuff? It's not coming from China, I hope.
No.
No, but probably will.
Calgon is a big name, Evoqua is a big
Those
name.
American companies or European companies?
I think they're North American, right?
Yeah, well, Calgon is, yeah.
Yeah.
And most of the PFAS funding through the state requires domestically sourced products as well.
Which drives the cost up.
American made.
I'm for that.
All right, I believe we covered the PFAS bench testing, and I think we're on to the slide 14, I believe.
Correct. So we've talked about that, how you can get a really small column. The next size up is the next size up on a column you could test it. And typically, maybe around a 6-inch diameter column, that's something that we can actually use the media unchanged in the column, and it just takes time to run the water through there, and you grab samples along the way, and you can monitor its performance over time.
Yeah, so for the rapid small scale test, you would fill a 55-gallon bucket off and send it to a laboratory. For a pilot study on site, you would have a trailer that has a hose basically from the source to columns in place and testing them on site, because you need more continuous water.
And typically we feed that at like a 2 10-gallon a minute. It's the garden hose.
This site in the picture.
Yep.
I think there's like four tubes there.
Yep.
Is that all one test, or each tube testing something different?
That particular photo could be from a number of different sites, but for PFAS, we tend to need, say, maybe 3 columns in series to get the full media height
3
that
like
would be
these?
required. Yeah, well, yeah, 3 of those 6-inch
Okay.
to simulate one tall filter.
So for an iron and manganese and PFAS pilot, you'd probably have one of those columns that was an iron filter, one of those columns was a manganese filter, and say 2 to 3 that were for PFAS. Right. And that would be the series going through.
And they look to be, what, 6 feet, 8 feet tall?
Yeah, it all depends on if we're doing it in a trailer, we have to squish them down, so we need more filters. If you guys had if there's a lot of headroom in the well building, it could be taller, but usually usually we bring a trailer out, and that's height limitation, so they're about 6 feet usually.
You got that 2 to 10 gallons per minute?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
One question, it says the well must be pumped at a high rate, 300 to 500 gallons per minute. For how long a period does that occur during the study?
Well, and we put that in there before we got some recent sampling data from the well. So right now the well is pumping at like 120 gallons a minute when you took that sample, and was still resulting in a PFAS concentration of around 30. So before, we thought that when he backed off on the flow rate, the PFAS concentration went down to around 3 parts per trillion, which made us believe that pumping, the rate at which you pump the well was highly influential upon the amount of PFAS you were pulling out. We're just finding out that that repeat sample was probably erroneous, and 30 is probably more correct, so it's less likely that we would need to pump the well at such a high flow rate to maintain an accurate test. But that's why we had put that in there originally, so that, but yes, the well pumps at whatever flow rate, somewhere between 100 and 500, it can't pump more than 500, but it'll have to pump at least the 120 that is going out of it now. That was done to take that test, so that we can then siphon off 2 to 10 gallons a minute during the pilot. So it would be continuous.
And how long would you expect the pilot to be?
So for a PFAS pilot study, typically the media can last a year or more, depending upon when breakthrough occurs. So what we're trying to do is run it long enough to find out when it actually breaks through the media, so that we can apply the economics as to how much filters should you provide in the full scale, based on how frequently you want to change the media.
So it would be that daily rate, whatever it is, between 100 and 500 gallons per minute, daily for a year.
Roughly, yep.
The data you have now, you're showing that to be roughly 120, or would you modify that with the data that you have now?
Yeah, I think we would go back and, the data that we just got doesn't make it seem like we would need to run the well at 500 gallons a minute to.
So as long as we turn it down, if the PFAS stays the same, we would want to run the well
As low as possible.
We only need 2 to 10, so
Yeah.
any way to maintain the right water quality parameters and a constant supply to the pilot trailer.
Right.
So I think the PFAS would stay the same, but the iron and manganese would rise dramatically with a higher flow rate.
And that, we've got a lot more information on how that impacts your filters, and that wouldn't pose a problem for us. There's enough iron and manganese at those low flow rates where we can confirm biological works, and then we've got enough information to go from there. 15, we're really ratcheting it up, so full-scale demonstration study, that's when you actually put the full-size treatment vessels out there and run full flow through those vessels and do an actual demonstration where we would even work with DEP so that we could put the effluent from that demonstration study into the distribution system. So you get your filter medias up in operational condition, running. We do confirmatory sampling that everything is being removed, and then with DEP's okay, we would, instead of wasting the water, we would run it into the system, and you guys could use it.
Is cold weather gonna affect, that's gonna have to go into a building if it's in the middle of the winter, or can you run it the way it is?
So that installation was a temporary PFAS tank that we installed while we were building the full-scale treatment plant right down the street, and that is a pre-picture. After that picture, we wrapped all the piping and tank with heat tracing and insulated it. So if you could do that, you could tent it, You could build a temporary building, which would probably not be cost effective, but, yeah, if you're gonna go for a longer term, full, demonstration study, you'd have to do some sort of mitigation for freezing.
Now, that unit right there, estimated cost 2 to 4 million? Is that what we're talking about, this particular?
No, not that vessel itself, no. That's where we're estimating, and we'd have to get into the details to refine it further. But to run a demonstration study, purchasing all the filter units you need, hooking them all up, getting all the permitting done, that's where that budget comes from, not just the one.
That's just an example of a full-scale filter, you know.
Are these prevailing wage, Charles?
Oh, yeah, of course it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, why not?
Well, I know that, I just wanted to hear it.
Actually, I just want to get that out there. Yeah. Actually, there'll also be federal, right? There'll be federal wage rates.
If we're looking for funding through the SRF program, the State Revolving Fund, who's offering planning study grants as well as low-interest loans and potentially principal forgiveness on those loans, they'll require you to meet federal wages, federal domestically sourced products and disadvantaged business. So there's a lot of extra red tape, but at the same time, they're offering a lot of additional, I can't call it grant, principal forgiveness.
Financial
There's
assistance.
financial assistance, thank you, yes, that's the right word.
So you said this water, you know, the full-scale study may go into the system. Where does the water go before that during the pilot study for the year, the 100 to 500 gallons a minute? Where does that go?
Under the full-scale one?
No.
No,
it was just
on-site
for-
pilot.
Yeah, so whatever is not used by the treatment system would just be run to waste, because it's untreated water. We can't put that into the distribution system.
Where does the waste go? It's a lot of water, 100 to 500 gallons a minute, right?
Yep, there'd be flow, dissipation structures, and it just kind of goes overland back to the water
Yeah,
body.
I think
To
when
the
you,
lake, that's where it goes.
yeah, and I think when we
Alright.
talk 500, I think we would not run it at 500 gallons per minute at a pilot scale at this point. I think if we're getting data to suggest that 100 gallons per minute is showing that the water quality is stable, we'd run it as low as possible to maintain the water quality and do the pilot, so I think
Well,
5.
we assume it would go back into the lake, that's where it came from, you know?
Wow.
Well, no, I know that, but I mean, it
Whatever.
hasn't been treated since it came out of the lake, so it's like taking a cup of water out of the lake and dumping it back in, it's the same thing.
Okay.
Any more questions on the full-scale demonstration?
No,
How long does that typically go on?
Again, we want to run it for roughly a year, just to see when the PFAS would break through the media. So the filter vessel itself, and even the pilot scale itself, there'll be several taps along the side of it. So we can monitor its progress through the filter media bed over time. So we know when we're getting close to spending our filter.
And do you spend it just once, or do you go multiple times to make sure you understand it, I guess? Is it defined enough in one time through or not?
Typically, we have multiple columns that running concurrently.
Yep.
So you can get repeat samples concurrently, if that's what you were asking.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if, you know, in that year, you spend your medium once, or you spend it multiple times through the year, and you're just trying to confirm that it will last a year.
In each case, we would, each test, we would want to start from a virgin, new media. This media does have the ability to be regenerated, but typically we don't base much of that off of for these pilot tests.
Thanks.
And I think the other piece of the full-scale demonstration study is there's the option to rent equipment, which, you know, likely costs a significant amount of money, but you can also purchase the equipment outright. And we don't know the exact economics of that, but they're much closer than we, you know, the renting the equipment isn't necessarily that much cheaper than buying it outright. So you could do a year worth of study and at least end up with some equipment that could either be, you know, build a building around it or relocate it later. There's some options there, so that you're not just, run a $4 million thing and then at the end of the day you have nothing to show for it. There is some infrastructure that we could, you know, depending on how much you want to spend, you could actually get something out of it, or you could just rent it and give it all back, and there's all sunk costs, but at least you have some data.
Yeah, so that picture on slide 15, so what Derek was talking about, so this project, this particular vessel, we're constructing a new treatment plant across the street at one of the other well sites. So the plant, this filter will get relocated into the permanent facility. So the town purchased that to get this particular well back online, knowing that the full-scale treatment plant was gonna be several years to complete. So when we're at the proper point of construction, the appropriate point of construction, that filter will then get moved into the new plant.
What's in that tank?
That's
the media.
Yeah,
Oh, I know that.
GAC media.
How do you get it out of there? It looks so-
You can't see it, that's, there are some ports at the top and bottom of the tank.
I
and-
assume that, but I
Yeah, it basically hose connections, a truck comes in, fills up with water, and they pump out the media from the truck into the vessel.
is there a port big enough for somebody to get in there and clean it out?
Down the
after?
other side, there's a 30-inch manway if you need to, that's all designable as well. You can choose how many manways you want to have. There's one on the top as well. So yeah, there's a couple ports in, and then there's also there's some sample taps on the side of the vessel that you can't see, and then there's also the media loading.
Now, is that filter from the bottom or the top? Which is the pressure line there?
It comes in the top and goes through the media downwards.
It's all under pressure, that whole vessel is
That's like
under pressure.
150 PSI vessel right there.
Is that just water pressure, or do you add air to it also?
It's just water pressure. So there's a well right outside of the picture here that's pumping into a distribution storage tank up the hill miles away, and the two create the pressure through that vessel.
That's what we actually try to remove all the air we can out of the water before it goes to these carbon vessels, so it doesn't impact your treatment. Which is important when considering biological, because we use a lot of air in the biological process, so we gotta make sure that all gets out before it goes to the next stage.
Now, that tank's a steel tank, or
Yep.
is it coated with anything on the inside, or painted?
Yeah, for a while we were using a vinyl ester coating, but there was a freezing event down in Texas over the last couple of years, and basically the nation's vinyl ester supply has just fallen apart. So we've moved over some more high solids epoxy coating inside the vessels.
Similar to what you would paint the inside of your storage tank.
Yeah, so if we did this, obviously there's maintenance, either new media, flushing and cleaning of media, maintenance of the tank, all this would come through the study, correct? What our maintenance costs could essentially be down the road?
Right.
Truly, the only thing we really don't know is how frequently you change the media. We know everything else
Right.
about the filters.
Right, so about how long the life expectancy of this tank is, when we need to have it cleaned and re-epoxied and that sort of thing. Similar to-
Basically, at the end of this study, we're gonna be able to sit down budget-wise and be like, for the next 20 years, we're gonna need to be spending X amount
Yeah.
per year on, within.
And that's the big leap that a lot of water systems have to deal with, is there's a lot of upfront costs to know what you're gonna be dealing with 20 years down the line. There's the option to kind of go ahead and we can make assumptions early on, at least on the PFAS side, by just putting a little bit more capital costs into it and expanding it, and just hoping that, it's gonna be, the change out is gonna be a year and a half. I know that there's been some report of some other water systems that I've heard through like Mass Waterworks and other associations where, they did some small scale columns and some other small testing, and not year-long tests, and they thought they were gonna get a year out of the media, and they're getting 8 months, and over 20 years, that can add up. So some folks really wanna know, or, I don't wanna change it out more than once a year, and that's really what the long-term study will give us.
I wanna try to get a little more information on the media. Have you done any of these that when they take it out of the vessels or whatever, that they dry it? I'm still thinking about.
They do clean it, they said that they.
Yeah, but I wanna know if there's a way of drying it, to lessen the amount, cause if you haul it away and it's sludge, now you're hauling away all kinds of water and sludge instead of.
Talking about the
So
Just the
I
media.
believe the study's gonna give us the most cost-effective way to do it, whether it be let it dry out and sludge
Well, how do
or.
you?
From what I understand,
We're talking two
media
different
needs to-
things here.
Yeah.
I think we're talking two different.
We're talking the PFAS media needs to get over to Buffalo and burned or something.
Right,
Yeah, that's.
That's how they incinerate it
Right.
at a very high temperature
That's how
to
you
destroy
regenerate
it.
it.
Yeah.
There are emerging technologies
Sure.
that have potential benefits to disposal costs, so we're.
You're not gonna
fingers
handle
crossed
this
on that.
GAC.
But you're not, yeah, you're not gonna touch the
What you
GAC.
would do is you get a contract with someone like Calgon, Evoqua, Norrit, have a contract with them and say, bring me a new truck of media, well, you'll take my old stuff, you'll go reactivate it at your plant, your incinerator, and then next time I need media, we'll swap it back again, and eventually you'll have like 4 or 5
So
loads
they,
and you'll just
so
swap.
they dry out the stuff you already have and bring it back to you?
Well, so when they pull it out of the vessel, we load it into the truck, and then they pressurize the truck to drive all the water out of it, so light, otherwise it'd be extremely heavy to drive over the roads.
So the stuff that they're bringing back is stuff that we already paid for?
If you want, that's an agreement you'd have to have with you can buy new media every
They clean
time.
it, John.
Right.
They.
Oh, they burn it.
They
Until it's
burn it,
dry.
whatever. They take the stuff out, so the next time it comes in, it can pull more
Yeah,
PFAS
yeah.
out.
Or you can buy brand new media every time.
Oh, I know that, hey, I'm trying to save some money, I'm trying to.
I was looking to see if they were selling us, we get a used one.
Yeah,
So I was called.
When they push the water out of the media in the truck, where does that water go?
Depends on where the filters are. If it's inside of a building, usually there's tanks that can capture that. Sometimes it goes directly to the ground.
but is that on site, like down the Hickory Hills?
That would be on site, yeah.
Okay.
All things that need to be.
So you could build, if you're concerned about that water going onto the ground, it's not a lot of water, it's 1 bed volume worth comparatively. You could put, we could have a staging area with a drain that goes to a tight tank if that was a concern.
Can they put that water out somewhere else besides right there, cause you'd have to pay for trucking, or, let's say you had a big gravel pit, that wasn't used for anything, you have bring it down there and pressurize the tank and put it out there? Or does it have to go on site with?
It's a weight issue.
Yeah, I think
They
it,
couldn't drive anywhere
Yeah,
with it
right.
until they got it out.
So is the water in it contaminated, or is it clean water that's already been through the filter?
in theory, it's the water that's in the vessel, so that's been treated with all the media that's in there. So depending on when you sample, if you sample and you have breakthrough at 2 ppt of PFAS, your water in that vessel probably has 2,
So it's acceptable to discharge in a,
it's something you gotta kind of work through.
Okay.
Most likely it's
so it's
there's
not hazardous, it's.
No, it's not hazardous. I mean, there's more PFAS
Less.
in the water at the site, in the groundwater,
Yeah, okay.
That what you're
than
putting
would be
back.
in that vessel. But that's something that we go through during the treatment plant permitting process, and
All regulated by E DEP.
So would your recommendation be, from what I'm hearing, that on-site pilot scale study is what you would prefer, and then the full-scale demonstration study, you would do both of those, or one or the other?
it would be one or the other.
One or the other, okay.
Nothing's better than doing a full-scale demonstration study to get good data, but it's orders of magnitude more expensive.
Do you have a cost on the on-site pilot scale study? I didn't see that.
Oh, that,
This one?
That was gonna be the next.
Oh.
Yeah, when we finish this,
Coming?
we're gonna get
It's
into
coming?
it.
Right,
Okay.
that's that one that's on that table. Oh, there you go.
I don't know if you have one. This is it.
Yeah, just wrap up the last.
We can wrap up the last
Yeah.
couple slides and we can go back and talk about costs.
Yeah.
Just slide 16, moving on then, full scale, what to expect. It'll be a number of 6 to 12 foot diameter pressure vessels. We're gonna be using the same chemicals that are already in use currently at the site. There's no change there. Biological filters, we're gonna have some settling tanks where we capture the backwash water, recycle, concentrate, eventually haul that material away. And then the PFAS media, like we were just talking about, that's replaced ideally every year or longer. It seems like a good design practice is to build in enough media volume into your plant so that you can change it around once a year or more, depending upon how you want to look at the economics of it.
What's the, of course you probably would know this, but what's the lifespan of these tanks? Or is it a different tank that you use?
The pressure vessels.
Yeah,
You keep up on the coating system and
Dehumidification.
dehumidification. It's, I mean, we've got plants that are 30, 40
so it
years
runs from
old.
the inside out?
Depends. No, if no dehumidification and it's a swamp in the building, then they might.
I really don't,
Oh,
I don't think there's a lot of wear and tear on the inside of these PFAS vessels because we're not backwashing them.
It's, yeah, for the PFAS vessels, you put an extra thick coating liner on there because there is some abrasion from when the media gets filled and drawn when you actually pull it out. But for the most part, yeah, 20 years, you'll have some minor rust, maybe some pot marks that might need to get fixed, but
So similar to water storage tank.
yeah,
You
it's
maintain it a lot
it's
more.
exactly that. It's
Exactly.
just small,
We
it's
have some-
smaller.
Right, we have some plants that, that we've done, going on 20 years old, and if you keep the environment that it's in, ideal, these things, last a very long time. I mean, 50 years is not unreasonable,
Yeah.
Just thinking about costs down the future. If you gotta replace all these tanks, I mean, you might as well just put a new system in there almost.
Yeah, a lot of places build, say, like a pre-engineered metal building around them, and most of the time, that building's probably gonna be restored before these tanks would have to, because these are fairly robust. It's really just, if you could put them outside, if it wasn't New England and it didn't freeze, they'd be fine to stay outside, just like your storage tanks are.
And I'm sure it'd be a heated building anyhow,
Yeah.
or environmentally controlled.
The biggest thing is dehumidification. We've seen some plants that didn't keep up on that, and there's a lot of corrosion. Other plants where they keep on top of it and just don't have to do much to it.
You can walk into some of these plants, that are 10 years old, 15 years old, and you'd swear they're brand new. I mean, it's all on how you maintain it.
Okay. And spent media is all the way for disposal. So then the last slide, the lake, we took a look at that. Just taking a quick look at, I know there were some concerns about operating the well and drawing down the level of the lake. We took a quick look at it and, seeing at least a 270 acre surface area. We took a look at rainfall, seeing as in the summer months you get on average around 2 inches of rain. At the maximum capacity of the well, we're talking much less than what you typically see in rainfall. So, and that's just on the surface area of the lake, whereas the lake it appears to have a larger than a two square mile drainage basin that drains to it. So there's tributaries that also collect rainwater and divert it to that lake as well. So it seems that there's enough natural rainfall that provides enough water that it overcomes what, if you were directly connected to the lake, we were taking out. You're not directly connected to the lake, so it's not the same thing. You don't have a pipe that's sticking in the lake and you pump out of the lake. You're a pipe that's in the ground next to the lake, so that you're not directly pulling out of the lake. And if you were, you'd have a very different permit from Mass DEP and very different requirements that you'd have to
Yeah,
comply
we
with.
passed all those.
Right.
Microscopic thicker analysis. passed
Right,
those.
so you've passed the testing that shows that you're not directly connected to
Correct.
the lake.
Do you know how far you are from the lake and what the well depth is?
Well depth is 49 feet. I'm not sure how far from the lake it's probably 30
20 feet?
30, yeah, it could be 20, 30
Yeah,
feet.
it's 20 to 30 feet, like that.
Sounds about right.
So we're well below the lake level.
Oh, yeah.
49 feet,
Yeah,
that's
the
for
lake
sure.
over there is very shallow. I mean, when we did the pump test, we had staff gauges out in the lake to monitor the lake level. And there was a stump right below the lake, so it's not very deep there.
Yeah.
So, and then I guess the only other thing maybe to talk about is the various options and what those, budgetary costs would be. Tom, you wanna?
Sure, did they get a copy of this?
Did you guys get this?
No.
Alright,
Yeah, I got-
that's in there, alright.
I got it. So what we did, was we just put together just a brief memo, just to give a general, kind of a general scope and preliminary budget, just to give you guys, as I started out the discussion, we'll just give you an idea of orders of magnitude, approximate costs, and approximate durations for each different option that we just talked about. So again, don't really need to get too much into the background here. We just talked about, but just want to point out that recent water samples indicated, so you're seeing iron levels approaching 0.5 milligrams per liter, along with manganese levels in the 0.4 range. So as we talked about before, the manganese above 0.3 is obviously requiring treatment. So PFAS in the well has been detected at 37 parts per trillion. And also, we just want to note that samples obtained directly from the lake showed PFAS concentrations in just under 20 parts per trillion. So just a quick summary on the pilot testing options. Option 1, biological only. This would not include a pilot study for PFAS. This would assume that we'd just do an on-site study for the biological, and then proceed with most likely a GAC. If we proceed with a GAC filter media for PFAS, that would not require DEP does not require a pilot study for that. If we did option 1, which would be probably the lowest cost, be around $160,000. The duration of this pilot study would be 2 to 3 months. Again, that all depends on how long it takes DEP to review our permit app. Each one of these requires a permit application to DEP that we have to prepare and describe exactly what the scope of the work is, the sampling protocol, with a description of how the equipment that's going to be installed and how it's going to be monitored for what duration. Option 2, maybe you want to take us through 2, 3, and 4.
Sure.
Kind of just.
So option 2 would be option 1 plus doing a rapid small scale column test on PFAS. So we would have the biological filtration pilot in place, and then we would take 55-gallon drum samples of the downstream of that pilot, and we take that water and ship it off to a lab and have them run it through those small column tests and compare a couple medias, and we'd have to make a judgment call on some design things based on the results there. It's similar duration to option 1 in terms of the biological pilot, with a little bit added time to then collect the water and ship it off for laboratory testing.
That's kind of what we're doing for Townsend right now, Fran, is we're doing just for on the PFAS.
Okay.
Like we discussed, some sites it's an urgency. They've got to get it online. They don't have the luxury to test it for longer durations to find out what's the best. They gotta be a little bit conservative, provide enough filters so that we're based on other sites and the rapid scale testing results, we're not backing them into an every 6-month swap out. It should be much longer than that, but we'll find out on the other end.
Yeah, so those rapid small scale column tests are kind of the size of a pen, and they size the media and the flow rates based on the bed volume, which is how much media, the water that takes up the size of the pen. So they can get 40,000, 100,000 bed volumes on a rapid small scale column test with a 55-gallon drum. If we want to actually get to 40,000, 100,000 bed volumes at a 6-inch column, that's say, two 6-foot tall columns or a 12-foot column, that's a lot. That's a significant amount more water. So it's infeasible to send that in 55-gallon drums off to a lab. So that's where we need to then have that PFAS column on site, and when it's running at 2 gallons per minute and it's got a multi-gallon bed volume, you have to get tens of thousands of flushes through that filter to actually try to get to breakthrough. So that's why you know, between option 2 and option 3, when you actually go to piloting on site for PFAS, you go from, say, a 4-month pilot to a 12-month pilot, because it takes so long to actually see results, because the media is working so well, it'll take so much time before you see it. So even if you want, you know, we've been talking very heavily on carbon, which typically breaks through at 40,000, 50,000 bed volumes. There's also ion exchange resins that some places have had success with, others have had trouble with them, so they have a kind of mixed review right now in Central Region. But those can go for 100,000, 150, 300,000 bed volumes, and those are even harder to test in terms of duration, because they just take so much time to actually see results.
So when you test this, you just basically have a canister of this media. You run it through until it stops working. Is that?
No, you run it through, and then periodically you take a sample, grab sample, and then
Yeah.
you send it off to the lab, and they say, oh, still 0. Or you take an intermediate sample and you say, it's finally gotten through part of the medium. So,
Okay.
and the breakthrough curve is not linear on these things, so it'll break through the top portion of the filter very quickly, but then it slows down as the media depth.
Okay.
You know, so it's not a linear thing that you can just interpret in a short amount of time.
So the PFAS pilot, what we would probably do is we'd mobilize, we'd have the biological system, we'd do a bunch of testing on the iron and manganese, you know, basically do a pilot test to prove out the iron and manganese system. And then once that couple weeks to months has gone by, it'd go to almost a set it and forget it. You'd come in, the pilot operator would have to check it a couple times a week, but you'd sample it once a month. You know, like Lou said, you'd say halfway through the column, no PFAS, don't even bother sampling the end, and you'd basically just wait till you see it, and then once you start seeing it, you move to the bottom of the column and wait till you start seeing it. So it's a matter of just every month and a half, every couple weeks, depending on how much money you want to spend in sampling, you take a sample, see what the results are, it continues to run. So there's not a lot of the more complex process is the iron and manganese system. That's got a lot more knobs to turn, a lot more things that it's going to have to do. It's going to have to be backwashed once a week. The PFAS system is very, sand in a can. It just kind of, it runs, and you have to sample it occasionally, and it's much more simpler. So even though it's much longer of a duration for a pilot, those back end, after the first 4 months, the next 8 months is much more simple of an operation.
Just time and sampling.
But you still have to maintain the biological iron and manganese system the whole time, and that's where the cost kind of gets driven up, because you have to have that pre-treatment system continuously operating.
How do the, well, I guess what I'm trying to say is, one of these is 16 months, option 2, no, option 3,
Option
16
3.
months.
Yep.
Now, in 16 months, I'm sure that the price of this system is gonna go up. So there's no locking in on anything.
You could buy things now, but you'd be doing so without.
Yeah,
Without
we don't
knowing
wanna do that.
what
But what I'm saying, a $4 million unit right now, 16 months could be $5 million.
The best course of action, though, if you were to move forward with full-scale treatment, would be to likely apply through the state's program, which the next application process would be in August of next year anyways. And you'd be put on a funding schedule through 2024 into 2025.
Now, do they take into account the additional prices, or they?
You have to do that in your request for funding.
So if you wanted 4 million, you request 5.
You have to build contingencies in.
And this is, this $4 million is just for the study portion of it. When we talk of full-scale building and process, we really haven't started looking at those numbers yet. So there's a.
Wait, $4 million for a study?
Okay, so when,
I've
you're
lost
at the
it
next
now.
level, you're at option 4, John, which
Yeah.
is a full demonstration study. They
Using the
run the
water.
well and use the
Okay.
water.
You can also sell that water.
So you get to keep the equipment you buy,
Okay,
And then you get to sell some water.
but you still need to build a building and the rest of
And,
the.
and it still hasn't really, you're buying the equipment with anticipation of what you're gonna treat.
yeah, no, I know,
Where
I'm
I
just-
like option 2 or 3 because it kind of tells you what you need to design to treat the
Mm.
levels of contaminants that you have.
So, if we were going for option 3, and we don't know what we're doing yet, but I feel like we've talked a lot and kind of like that the best. As you sample these, the water as time goes along, would it be possible to sample the lake also to make sure that
Well,
we're not adding anything to the lake, or, you know, like, you know what I'm saying, like, as this goes along?
We're trying to keep the people down at Hickory Hills happy.
well,
So,
we're trying to not adversely affect
Right, the lake.
Right.
So any backwash that would possibly have contaminants would need to be trucked off-site. I agree with Mr. Woodward on, you know, testing the lake at the same time to make sure we're not increasing any, and negatively affecting the lake in that way. And anything that you can, you know, one of the concerns is lake levels. If there is a way that we could put a component in to study lake levels, something as simple as, I know,
Yeah,
I know, you know, Lake Shirley, the dam keeper keeps like records, and they know lake levels. You can say, hey, what was the lake level on, August 5th, 2005? And they can go back and they can say, oh yeah, the dam keeper kept this record. I'm not aware if there's anything like that being done currently, but even just for the term of our study,
Just something to make sure that we're not.
something that we're not, that if, you know, if we're pumping this amount of water, obviously some of it's going back in. It's tough to tell. We're gonna have to probably monitor, once it's on full scale, continue to monitor lake levels to see if we're actually adversely affecting them or not. It's, you get evaporation and all sorts of sciences that I don't, you know, I haven't taken schooling for, so.
So in terms
we
of
wanna try
the,
to be aware of that, that's all.
so in terms of the impact of lake level, included in these budgets are monitoring of the lake level through the duration of the testing.
So we were gonna bring a hydrogeologist on board.
So we bring a hydrogeologist who specializes in groundwater and these types of interactions, surface water to groundwater, to help understand what is going on during this testing.
And I'm assuming he also takes into account evaporation, weather conditions, all
Correct.
sorts, there's so many different things that affect the lake levels.
Correct.
Yeah, and then we just wanna make sure that we're not gonna, if we're adversely affecting the lake, how is it? So that
So
we can.
would we be
discuss it.
part of this? I mean, like rainfall, typically you put a rain gauge out and you monitor how much rain you got and record that. I'm sure they're not gonna do that. Would we?
We could set up, probably just set up like a weather station.
Okay, because I know like when we do pump tests, there's loggers we stick in, we did like, ones in the swampy area.
Yeah.
Piezometers.
Yep, and then we did them in all the observation wells, and they're very accurate loggers that sit in the water, and it reads continuously, you just go and plug in and read them. And I would imagine we could do the same kind of thing, you know, we could actually do them in the lake levels.
Yeah, I think Dave gave us some assistance on this one, and he gave us the option, you could put loggers in there that I think per year there's a battery in there. I think it calls out and it automatically uploads data
Yeah.
to the cloud.
Yeah, they're actually our loggers, so.
Yeah.
Now, so something we could continue to do even after this, so we'd be able to monitor whatever the.
Right.
Oh, yeah,
We
we can
would wanna do
continue.
the antecedent too, so you would wanna start monitoring before we started. and,
Yep.
You know, get kind of the background data before we even start.
So yeah, especially now with the SCADA days, I mean, if we did have the loggers and they were tied in and we could monitor, we could trend it for.
Yeah.
That's what I think that'd be great.
You don't have to worry about different people and how they measure, you know, the,
Sure, take the human error out of it.
right,
Yeah.
it's all the same measurement.
So, I'm kind of looking forward, and I keep looking at the information they have and the tanks and things like that, and I can't see anything less than like a 2,500 square foot building or something like that there, to be able to house all this stuff, plus driveways to be able to get tankers in, to be able to park and maybe drain them, or, you know, other drains and other storage tanks and things like that. This seems like a significant size. I mean, I understand this is just a study, but my question really is to to the water commission, do we have that kind of land there? Is it that,
Well, we-
I don't know how much space is there, but
I
it
mean,
doesn't
we-
seem like this much.
We haven't used it in a while, but we would drive the tanker down there to deliver the chemicals for the pH control. So a tanker truck can easily get there. That's why the road that is in front of the building, that's where the tanker truck would pull past, and then it would back up and drive out.
But if you added a building of this size to house all this stuff, is
As
there
long as
still
it
room?
wasn't in the roadway, because the current road, they can turn around and, use the current access road, so.
And you have set-offs from the lake, right? Because you're gonna have that with conservation, so you're not gonna be able to build, certainly no closer than 30 feet. And, maybe it's 50. I'm curious, because it doesn't seem like a very big space
I agree.
there.
Yeah, we all agree.
And